night, where the moonlight glows. Zombies lurking everywhere, that's how the story goes. Grab your gear, hold on tight, it's a wild...
The world didn't end with fire. It ended with silence. And in that silence, the dead rose. Cities crumbled, streets emptied. Survivors became shadows, trusting no one, because sometimes the living were far more dangerous than the dead. But in the heart of the ruined city of Halewood, one place defied the darkness, the last library, a fortress of stone, iron, and desperate hope. Inside, Mara Sullivan, once a simple history teacher, fought to protect the fragile spark of humanity. Beside her stood Daniel Creed, a soldier haunted by everything he had lost. Together, they built a sanctuary. But even in a stronghold of knowledge and memory, betrayal found a way in. This is a story of survival, of broken trust, and of what it truly means to lead when the world has fallen apart. Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone, your home for chilling tales of survival, suspense, and the undead. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Zombie Story Zone. Your support helps our community grow, and your comments mean a lot. Let us know what you loved and how we can make the next story even better. Now, let's dive into the ashes of the world.
As the horror unfolds in the Zombie Story Zone, adventure never grows old. Grades and laughter, it's a crazy mix.
The world ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. No grand explosions, no heroic final stands, just silence. The kind that pressed against your ears, suffocating, heavy with everything that had been lost. By the time the government admitted the infection had spread beyond control, it was already too late. Cities that once pulsed with life turned into hollow graveyards overnight. Skyscrapers stood like tombstones. Empty cars littered highways like the skeletons of some great dead beast. The infected, once neighbors, friends, family, now roamed freely, their hollow eyes searching for the living. Survivors were few. Those who remained were cautious, brutal, and colder than the corpses they dodged. Yet even amid the ruin, there were places that fought against oblivion, small flickers of rebellion against the dark. In the heart of the ruined city of Halewood, one such place endured, the old public library. It was a relic from another time, a sprawling stone building built in the early 1900s, its walls thick and defiant against the years. While fires gutted downtown and bombs cratered the suburbs, the library stood untouched, as if history itself refused to surrender it. Inside, life clung stubbornly to the brittle bones of civilization. Iron bars were welded over stained glass windows. Sandbags filled the ornate archways. Clever traps, tripwires, pitfalls, deadfalls had been woven into the perimeter like a spider's web. Those who called the library home didn't merely survive. They defended. They remembered. They resisted. At the center of it all was Mara Sullivan, a former history teacher, once better suited to dusty lectures and rolled-up maps than to the art of war. Now, she wielded strategy like a blade. Her sharp blue eyes missed nothing. Her mind, once filled with lesson plans and dates, now plotted escape routes, resource lists, survival contingencies. She wore her grief like armor, her anger like a shield. And though she smiled rarely, when she did, it was a glimpse of the woman she had once been, and the ghost she was fast becoming. At her side stood Daniel Creed, an ex-Marine, all muscle, scars, and hard-earned instinct. His hands had saved them more times than Mara could count. Steady, ruthless hands that built, fought, and killed without hesitation. Together, they ruled the last library with a delicate, uneasy mix of trust, fear, and necessity. But something more dangerous had taken root between them. Something even more treacherous than the dead waiting outside the barricades. Love, or what Mara thought was love. It had crept into the cracks left by grief and exhaustion, threading itself into their whispered conversations in the dark, their shared victories, their bruised laughter. It felt real. It felt necessary. It felt inevitable. But in a world where survival demanded betrayal, Mara was about to learn that the heart could be the deadliest weakness of all. And some betrayals cut deeper than any infected bite. The library's air was thick with dust and old stories, heavy with the scent of parchment and mildew. Its ancient wooden shelves battered but standing strong, reached toward the vaulted ceilings like desperate hands yearning for salvation. This was the heart of Halewood's last hope, a relic of the old world surviving stubbornly amid the ashes of the new. Survivors had fortified it with brutal efficiency. Iron bars welded across every window, sandbags piled at each vulnerable door, and traps, clever, vicious traps, tucked into the shadows to catch any zombie or human threat foolish enough to come too close. In the world outside, death was the law. But within these walls, knowledge had become a weapon sharper than any blade. At the center of it all stood Mara Sullivan, once a history teacher, now something harder, colder. She wore her hair tied back tight, her face smudged with dirt and determination. But even in this brutal new life, her eyes, an arresting, clear blue, still held a glint of hope, a stubborn refusal to let go of the belief that something good might still be saved. Her partner in leadership, and in quiet moments, her partner in something more, was Daniel Creed. He had been a Marine before the fall, the kind of man built for survival, his body all muscle and old scars. Yet he wasn't just a fighter. Daniel understood the importance of discipline, of trust, and Mara trusted him more than she trusted anyone, perhaps even herself. Every evening, Mara climbed to the rooftop with Daniel at her side. Together, they scanned the ruined city with battered binoculars, counting shambling figures, watching for signs of danger or life. "I think," Daniel said one night, his voice low and rough, "we could make this permanent, restart something new." Mara allowed herself to dream for a moment. She imagined gardens growing wild on the library's roof, classrooms filled once more, not with death drills and rationing lessons, but with real teaching. She imagined Daniel beside her, a life where love wasn't a liability. "You really think we can?" she asked, voice tight with the desperate need to believe. Daniel's hand brushed hers, his touch warm even in the cold air. "With you? I'd bet my life." Mara smiled, leaning into his warmth as the dead moaned faintly in the distance, a grim reminder that outside their fragile sanctuary, the world was still waiting to devour them. And somewhere in the library's deepest shadows, unseen and patient, betrayal had already begun to bloom. The rain that night was a cold, relentless whisper against the library's stone walls. It had been days since the last sign of another living soul, and the survivors inside had grown complacent so that it lulled into a fragile sense of safety. Then came the frantic pounding at the main door. Mara and Daniel were the first to respond, weapons raised. Through the rain-smeared glass, they saw them, 3 figures, drenched and shivering, pleading to be let inside. Claire, barely more than a girl, her golden hair plastered to her skull, eyes wide with desperation. Jonas, broad-shouldered and silent, a permanent scowl carved into his face. And Luke, with his easy smile, his hands raised in a show of peace, his voice cutting through the storm even before the door cracked open. "Please, we're not infected. Please." Mara's instincts screamed caution, but Daniel overruled her with a sharp nod. "We need numbers," he whispered. "We're stronger together." Reluctantly, the door was unbarred. For a time, things seemed to settle. Claire threw herself into chores with a fiery enthusiasm, helping to reinforce barricades and organize supplies. Luke spun stories around the campfire at night, breathing laughter into the weary survivors. Even Jonas, though cold and brooding, pulled his weight, fortifying traps and helping in scavenging runs. But the cracks began to show quickly. It started small, books misplaced from the critical resource shelves. Then a rifle went missing. Rations dwindled faster than could be explained. Suspicion gnawed at the group like rats in the walls. Mara watched Claire laugh too easily at Daniel's jokes, lean too close when she thought no one noticed. She saw Luke whispering with Jonas in the dark corners of the stacks, voices low and urgent. When Mara confronted Daniel about it, he only shook his head. "You're seeing ghosts," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We're safe here. They're just scared. Like us." But the unease settled into Mara's bones, heavy and cold. She lay awake at night, listening to the creak of footsteps where no one should be, the faint scrape of metal against metal. Somewhere deep inside her, a terrible truth was forming, sharp and inevitable. The library was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a powder keg, and someone was already holding the match. Awesome. Here's an expanded, deeper version of Chapter 3, Betrayal Bleeds Red, adding about 400 words with richer emotion, brutal action, and tightening suspense. Chapter 3, Betrayal Bleeds Red expanded. It happened faster than anyone expected. One moment, the library was humming with the soft sounds of survival, the murmur of whispered conversations, the crackle of a fire, the rustle of pages turning. The next, the world split open. The front doors, once sealed so tightly Mara would have sworn no one could breach them, swung inward with a terrible shriek of tearing metal. And behind them poured the dead, not a few stragglers, an army. The survivors screamed, scattering like leaves before a storm. The smell hit first, a reeking stench of rot and blood that filled every corner of the library, choking the air. Then came the biting, tearing, clawing. Mara fought on instinct. She grabbed the sharpened pipe she kept strapped under her jacket and drove it through the nearest zombie's eye socket with a savage grunt. Blood sprayed hot and thick across her face, but there was no time to wipe it away. All around her, her people, friends she had taught to read maps, to splint broken arms, to hope again, were dying, torn apart like rag dolls in a wolf pack. And Daniel? Gone. Mara searched the chaos frantically, shoving aside falling bodies and snapping jaws. Where was he? Where was the man who had promised her a future? Gunfire cracked from somewhere deeper inside the library. Controlled bursts, methodical. Mara knew the sound of Daniel's rifle like she knew her own heartbeat, but it was getting fainter, moving away from the fighting, not toward it. She stumbled into the archive room, desperate for the old blueprints that might offer an escape route. That's where she found Claire. The girl was crouched among the old parchment maps and blueprints, her face lit by the flickering torch in her hand. Her smile was feral, wicked. "You should have stayed out of it, Mara," Claire said, voice dripping with venom. "You were always too soft." Mara tightened her grip on her pipe, fury warring with confusion. "You did this," she whispered. "You let them in." Claire shrugged, almost lazily. "We needed power, real power. You were just in the way." And before Mara could react, Claire flung the burning torch into the dry heap of centuries-old papers. Flames roared to life in an instant, hungrily devouring the fragile knowledge Mara had fought so hard to preserve. The room became an inferno. Mara didn't think. She moved. She sprinted to the window, smashing it open with the hilt of her weapon. Glass sliced into her arms and face as she hurled herself into the night. She hit the ground hard, pain splintering through her side, but she forced herself up, stumbling away from the burning library. Behind her, her sanctuary, her dream, was reduced to a screaming pyre. And somewhere inside those flames, the last pieces of her old life, her trust, her love, her hope, burned away with everything else. The world beyond the library was a graveyard. Mara stumbled through the skeletal remains of Halewood, her breath shallow and ragged, each step a brutal act of will. Blood, some of it hers, some not, caked her clothes and hands. Her side throbbed where she had slammed into the ground during her escape, and a jagged shard of glass was still embedded in her thigh. But pain was good. Pain meant she was still alive. The library burned for 3 nights. Long after she had fled, the black smoke curled upward, staining the bruised sky like a funeral shroud. Mara watched it from the crumbling ruins of an abandoned storefront, clutching a rusted pipe in one hand and an ancient, water-damaged atlas in the other. She could not bear to look away. It felt like watching a friend die, slow, cruel, inevitable. By the 4th day, the fires guttered out, leaving behind only ash, ruin, and the echoes of broken dreams. Mara scavenged what she could from the husks of dead shops and gutted apartments. Moldy crackers, cracked cans of beans, a dented canteen she filled with rainwater. She slept in short, fevered bursts, always with one eye open, always listening for the wet, shuffling footsteps that meant death was close. Loneliness gnawed at her worse than hunger. She had lived so long surrounded by others, by Daniel's quiet strength, the nervous laughter of the younger survivors, the nightly whispered plans over flickering candles. Now there was only silence, a silence so thick it screamed. And in that silence, doubts crept in. Visions of Daniel haunted her, standing tall amid the flames, reaching out a hand to her, his mouth moving in silent apologies she could not hear. Sometimes she woke with her hands outstretched toward nothing, heart hammering. Why had he betrayed her? Was survival really worth the cost of everything they had built? Or had he simply never loved her at all? She didn't know which answer hurt more. After a week of drifting through the ruins like a ghost, Mara found shelter in the broken skeleton of an old radio station. Its towers collapsed like broken limbs against the horizon. Inside, among cracked microphones and dusty records, she made her stand. She patched her wounds with duct tape and torn cloth. She rationed her meager supplies with brutal discipline. And each night, she whispered to herself in the dark, "I am not dead yet. I am not done yet." But she was changing. Small things, at first. An odd fever that came and went, a tremor in her fingers, a sharpness in her senses. She smelled things no human should smell. The iron tang of old blood, the sweet rot of distant corpses. Deep inside her, something stirred, something alien, hungry, waiting. Mara ignored it. She had only one purpose now, to find Daniel, to look him in the eyes and to make him pay. The city's heart had rotted. Mara followed the faint traces of humanity, the broken footprints in the mud, the faint smoke trailing across the gray sky, to what had once been Halewood's grand courthouse. Now, it was a fortress. Scrap metal and bones had been lashed together into crude barricades. Fires burned in oil drums, casting twitching shadows against the blackened stone. And atop the cracked marble steps sat Daniel, alive, whole, and crowned in the spoils of betrayal. He looked different. No longer the man who had once whispered dreams of gardens and classrooms into her ear. Now he was a king of ruins. His battered armor gleamed with blood and soot. A ragged cloak, stitched from scavenged banners, trailed behind him like a coronation robe. Around him knelt survivors. Mara recognized some faces. Others were strangers. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies gaunt, their loyalty bought with promises of food, shelter, and protection from the dead. Mara tightened her grip on the rusted axe she had scavenged. Every fiber of her screamed to charge, to bury it in Daniel's smug, traitorous chest. But she forced herself to wait. He saw her instantly. His face flickered. Shock, regret, something darker. And then he smiled. "Still alive," he said, his voice carrying easily across the ruined square. "I knew you would be." Mara said nothing. Words felt useless. Daniel rose from his makeshift throne, stepping down toward her, slow and deliberate. The others parted for him like water. "You don't understand, Mara," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. His voice was low, persuasive, the same voice that had once promised her forever. "The old world is dead. Dreams won't save us. Only strength." He held out his hand. "Join me. Rule this new world with me. We can still have what we wanted. Safety, peace, power." For a heartbeat, Mara wavered. The infection inside her stirred, hungry and wild. She could feel it thrumming under her skin, whispering promises of strength beyond anything Daniel could imagine, of tearing him apart, of taking his crown for herself. But Mara was still Mara. She had already lost everything else. She would not lose her soul. She smiled, a cold, broken thing, and drove the axe deep into Daniel's thigh. He howled, falling to one knee, clutching at the wound. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Mara fought like a woman possessed, dodging, striking, moving through the panicked crowd like a blade through silk. She didn't stop until she stood over Daniel, his blood pooling black in the ash-choked earth. "You betrayed me," she said, voice trembling. "You betrayed all of us." Daniel gasped, reaching for her, but Mara stepped back. The infection inside her surged forward, uncoiling like a snake. She felt her vision sharpen, her muscles coil, her heart pound with unnatural force. She knew, in that moment, she was no longer entirely human. But she didn't care. She would be the monster he had made her. Mara turned away, leaving Daniel to bleed out in the ruins of his false kingdom. She disappeared into the smoke, the whispers of the dead rising around her like a crown. But the twist was just beginning. Far from the courthouse, deep in the infected city, Claire watched from the shadows, a cold smile playing on her lips. She had survived the fire, and she had not forgotten. The game between them was not over. It was only just beginning. The rain came again, washing the blood from Mara's hands, but never from her memory. She wandered through the hollowed streets, alone but not lonely anymore. Something inside her had changed, solidified, like molten metal cooling into a sharper, harder shape. The infection, once a silent passenger under her skin, had become a part of her, but it had not consumed her. Not yet. Mara learned quickly how to control it. The fever gave her strength. The heightened senses became tools rather than curses. She moved through the city unseen, a ghost with a predator's grace. She could smell the rot before the dead appeared. She could feel the pulse of the living, even behind walls. In the wreckage of Halewood, she carved out a new existence. Brutal, simple, undeniable. The other survivors began to whisper about her in the ruins. The woman who walks where the dead won't follow. The one with blood on her hands and ash in her eyes. The queen of nothing. Mara didn't seek them out, but they came. The broken, the betrayed, the desperate. They found her, dragging their wounded souls behind them like broken chains. And though she had no throne, no crown, no library filled with hope, she had something better. Fear, respect, a different kind of power. She built no walls. She made no speeches. She gave them only 3 rules. Protect each other. Take only what you need. Never trust the living too easily. They followed her because they had nowhere else to go, and perhaps, deep down, because they knew she was no longer one of them. Mara stood atop the shattered radio tower one gray dawn, watching the smoke of distant fires smudge the horizon. The old world was gone, burned to ash by betrayal, greed, and fear. The new world would not be built on dreams. It would be built on survival. Behind her, the survivors gathered, silent, waiting for her lead. Mara looked once at the broken skyline, felt the hunger of the infection stirring inside her. A reminder of what she was, what she could become. She did not flinch. Without a word, she turned and led them into the dead city, her shadow stretching long and sharp across the ruins. A queen. Of nothing. And everything. The city slept under a heavy, choking mist. Ash drifted down from the ruined skyline like black snow, coating broken streets and abandoned buildings in a funeral shroud. Somewhere far off, a building collapsed with a low, mournful groan, but no one stirred. The dead ruled here, and the living moved like ghosts. At the edge of the city, inside the cracked shell of a once grand hotel, a small flame flickered. Claire crouched by it, carefully feeding scraps of paper and cloth into the fire. Her eyes, sharp, unblinking, reflected the flames, dancing with a terrible light. Around her, the survivors she had gathered whispered and murmured. Some bore crude weapons. Others wore salvaged bits of armor. None dared to speak too loudly. They all knew Claire had changed since the fire. Since the betrayal. Since Mara. She traced a line in the soot-covered floor with one finger, drawing a rough, jagged symbol. Part map, part warning, part curse. Mara whispered, the name a blade against her tongue. She had seen Mara escape the library's blaze, seen her grow stronger instead of falling. That strength, that defiance, it gnawed at Claire like acid. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Mara should have died with the rest. Burned, broken, forgotten. Instead, she had risen. Queen of nothing, they called her now. But Claire knew better. Mara was a mistake that needed correcting. Claire closed her fist around a rusted locket, once her mother's, and pressed it to her lips. A vow unspoken, but ironclad. I'll burn her world down. Claire murmured to the flames. Brick by brick. Blood by blood. Behind her, her small band of followers waited, silent and hungry for leadership, for revenge. And far beyond the city limits, in the ashes of what had once been civilization, Mara led her people deeper into the wild unknown. Unaware that the greatest threat she would ever face was not the mindless dead, but a woman who had once called herself her ally. In the end, the dead were predictable. It was the living who were dangerous. The wind howled through the broken windows, carrying with it the ashes of the past and the faint, bitter echoes of what was still to come. In a world where even hope can betray you, what would you sacrifice to survive? This was the Zombie Story Zone, where every heartbeat is a countdown. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And leave your whispers in the comments. Your voice shapes our next nightmare.
Zombie Story Zone, where the brave don't fear the dead. Welcome to the Zombie Story Zone, where the tales survive